Every compass you have ever seen tells you the same thing: north, south, east, west, maybe the ordinals between them. 8 directions, clean, simple, universal. But before 1840, navigation manuals across Europe, Central Asia, and the Ottoman territories referenced something else entirely. A directional concept so embedded in how humans moved across the earth that it appeared on compass roses from Portugal to Persia. It was not a cardinal direction. It was not an ordinal. It was something older, something tied to a form of spatial awareness that modern cartography does not acknowledge. And then, within a single generation, it vanished, pulled from every published compass rose, scrubbed from revised navigation manuals, replaced with standardized systems that treated direction as a flat, purely geometric problem. The question nobody asks is why. Why would you remove a navigational tool that worked? Why would you strip a concept from the compass that sailors, overland traders, and surveyors had relied on for centuries? And why did the removal happen at precisely the same moment that the old world's infrastructure was being reassigned to new owners? If you find this kind of hidden history fascinating, do me a favor. Like this video right now so more people can find it. That is the only way content like this reaches anyone. Now. To understand what was removed, you first have to understand what the compass rose actually was before the 19th century simplified it. The compass roses that survive in pre-1840 maritime charts are not the clean, symmetrical diagrams you see printed on modern maps. They are dense, layered instruments. Some of them contain 32 points. Others contain nested rings with symbols that do not correspond to any direction we currently recognize. And on a surprising number of them, particularly those originating from Mediterranean and Central Asian cartographers, there is a central marker. Not decorative, functional. This central marker was not pointing anywhere, it was pointing inward. The concept had different names depending on the region. In Arabic navigational texts from the 12th and 13th centuries, there are references to a directional principle that translates roughly to the seat of knowing. Portuguese maritime documents from the 15th century describe something called o ponto fixo, the fixed point, not a location on a map, a reference to the navigator's own position as a living axis within the directional system. Think about that for a moment. Modern navigation treats you as a dot on a grid. You are here and everything else is relative to that dot. But the old system treated the navigator. I have to pause here for a second. Because what I just described, that is one case from a much larger pattern. There are 35 documented cases in a document I put together. Different cities, different decades, different types of evidence. Every single one follows the same sequence: discovered, documented, acquired, disappeared. I could not fit all of it into a video. It's in the pinned comment below. Find it before we continue. Orient the compass, then orient himself within it. The internal calibration, the fixed point, was the step that preceded every course correction. Without it, the external directions were considered unreliable, not because the compass was broken, but because the person reading it was not anchored. The closest modern equivalent might be proprioception, the body's awareness of itself in space. But the old navigational tradition treated this as a trainable directional sense, not just a passive biological function. There are documents from the Venetian maritime academies that describe multi-year training programs where students learn to feel cardinal direction without instruments. The compass was a confirmation tool. The navigator's internal orientation was the primary instrument, and the central point on the compass rose was the symbol for that internal instrument. So why did it disappear? The short answer is standardization. The long answer is much stranger. Between 1790 and 1840, the Western world underwent what historians politely call the Great Survey era. This was the period when national governments began systematically mapping their territories using new standardized methods. The British Ordnance Survey, the French Cadastre, the Prussian Landesaufnahme. Every major European power launched massive cartographic projects within the same narrow window of time. On the surface, this makes sense. Nations needed accurate maps for military planning, taxation, and infrastructure. But the speed and totality of the transition raises questions that nobody in mainstream academia seems interested in answering. Within 50 years, every competing navigational tradition on the continent was replaced by a single geometric system. Centuries of accumulated knowledge, regional techniques, and alternative spatial frameworks were not integrated into the new system. They were discarded. Deliberately. Consider what that actually means. Navigational traditions that had successfully guided ships across the Atlantic, through the Indian Ocean, and along the Silk Road overland routes for generations were suddenly declared obsolete. Not because they failed. They had not failed. They were working. They were replaced because they carried within them a framework of spatial understanding that the new authorities could not control. A navigator who carries direction inside himself does not need... Before I go further, that document in the pinned comment. If you have not found it yet, go there now. Because everything I cover in these videos is one piece of a pattern that only becomes visible when you see all 35 cases together. The document shows you the full pattern. What I can show you here is the surface. What is down there is everything underneath it. Pinned comment, now, then come back. Centralizing power. And centralization is exactly what was happening during those 50 years. And the seventh direction, the navigator's internal axis, was the first thing to go. The new cartographic standard treated the Earth as a flat problem, a grid of coordinates, latitude and longitude. The navigator was no longer a participant. The navigator was a reader. You looked at the map, you identified your position, you followed the line. The internal calibration step was not just removed, it was rendered conceptually unnecessary. Here is where it gets uncomfortable. And this is the part where the official historical record stops being helpful, because the official record was written by the same people who ordered the changes. The same 50-year window that erased the seventh direction also erased something else. The infrastructure. Across Europe, Asia and North America, buildings, roads, canals, and entire city layouts that predated the survey era were reassigned. New origin stories were written for structures that had clearly existed before the governments claiming them. The official narrative became that these were all built by the current administrations. New construction, recent achievements, but the navigational evidence tells a different story. Many of the old world structures, particularly the grand buildings with their enormous columns, their precise geometric layouts, and their suspicious uniformity across continents, are aligned not to modern grid coordinates but to something else. They are oriented to magnetic and solar principles that match the old navigational system, the one with 7 directions, not 4. This alignment is not subtle. In city after city, the grand old buildings face directions that make no sense on a modern grid, but make perfect sense if you account for the navigator's fixed point. They were not built by people who used latitude and longitude. They were built by people who used the older system, the one that included the human body as a directional axis. The removal of the 7th direction from the compass did not just change how people navigated, it severed the conceptual link between the human body and the built environment. Once you no longer understood yourself as a directional instrument, you could no longer read the old buildings. Their orientations became meaningless. Their layouts became decorative rather than functional, and the people who built them became invisible. This is the part that most researchers refuse to touch. The old navigational texts do not just describe how to sail a ship. They describe a complete spatial philosophy, the human being at the center, the built environment as an extension of human directional awareness, and the compass as a bridge between the internal and the external. When that bridge was removed, the entire framework collapsed, and it collapsed exactly when it needed to, from the perspective of anyone who wanted to claim the old infrastructure as their own. Think about what you need to erase a civilization. You do not need to destroy their buildings, you just need to destroy the knowledge system that explains who built them and why. If nobody understands the navigational principles that govern the placement and orientation of these structures, then anyone can claim they built them. And that is precisely what happened. The great surveys did not just map the land, They remapped meaning. The new coordinate system stripped the old buildings of their directional logic. The new compass stripped navigators of their internal axis. And the new histories stripped entire populations of their architectural heritage. There are surviving compass roses from the early 1800s that still show the central marker. They exist in private collections, in the back rooms of maritime museums, and in uncatalogued archives across southern Europe and North Africa. They are not hidden exactly. They are just not displayed. They do not fit the narrative of steady progress from primitive tools to sophisticated instruments, because they suggest the opposite, that the older tools were more sophisticated, that something was lost, not gained. One of the most striking examples is a compass rose from a Portuguese maritime chart dated to approximately 1790. It shows the standard 32 wind points, but at the centre, instead of a simple decorative flourish, there is a detailed human figure. Arms extended, feet grounded, head aligned to magnetic north. The body itself is the compass. The mechanical instrument around it is the support structure. There are similar examples from Genoese charts of the same period, from Ottoman navigation manuals that survived in private libraries in Istanbul, from a Catalan atlas fragment held in a collection in Barcelona that has never been formally catalogued. Each one shows the same thing. The human figure at the centre, the body as the primary instrument, the mechanical compass as secondary confirmation, and every single one of them predates 1840. After that line, the figure vanishes. The centre becomes decorative. The body is erased from the system. 50 years later, that figure is gone from every published chart. The centre of the compass becomes an empty point, a void, and the navigator becomes a passive observer of direction rather than an active generator of it. The implications run deeper than navigation. If the human body was once understood as a directional instrument, then the built environment was designed to interact with that instrument. Buildings were not just shelters. They were spatial tools calibrated to the people who inhabited them. Their proportions, their orientations, their acoustic properties, all of it was designed for bodies that understood themselves as directional beings. Modern architecture has none of this. Modern buildings are oriented to property lines, zoning codes, and traffic flow. The human body inside them is irrelevant to their design. We walk through spaces that were not built for us as directional beings. We inhabit structures that treat us as objects, not instruments, and there is something else worth noticing. Walk into any of the grand old buildings, the ones with the enormous entrance halls, the domed ceilings, the columns that no modern engineering firm can explain the transport of. Stand in the centre of one of those spaces and pay attention to what your body does. There is an alignment that happens, a settling. The old builders knew about that response because they designed for it. The proportions of those rooms are not random. They are calibrated to the human body standing at its own centre, oriented in all directions simultaneously. Now walk into a modern office building, a modern airport, a modern shopping centre. Nothing in your body responds. The space does not interact with you. It contains you. There is a difference, and the difference is the seventh direction. And we never think to ask why, because the seventh direction was removed before anyone alive today was born. The knowledge gap is now so complete that the very idea of a human directional axis sounds like fantasy. It sounds like pseudoscience. It sounds like exactly the kind of thing that would be dismissed by anyone educated within the system that replaced it, which, if you think about it, is exactly how you would want it to sound if you had removed it on purpose. The compass rose tells a story, not just about where to go, but about who we were before someone decided we did not need to know. 8 directions is a geometric tool. 7 directions was a human one. And the difference between those two things might explain more about the world we inherited than any official history ever will. The timeline is not ambiguous. Before 1840, the human body was at the centre of navigation. After 1840, it was not. Before 1840, buildings were oriented to principles that included the navigator's internal axis. After 1840, they were oriented to grids that excluded it. Before 1840, compass roses showed the human figure as the 7th point. After 1840, the centre was empty. Something was taken. Not lost, taken. And the people who took it knew exactly what they were doing, because they did it everywhere at the same time. The old maps are still out there, the old buildings are still standing, and the old compass roses, the ones with the figure at the centre, are still sitting in drawers and archives where nobody is looking. Maybe it is time someone started.